Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Syria and the region after the Assad regime. My name is Suat Cubukcu. I am a senior fellow at Orion Policy Institute and assistant professor at the Towson University in Maryland. First of all, I'd like to thank Orion Policy Institute for organizing excuse me, this timely and significant webinar. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the OPI website and our YouTube channel. And we have our Q&A function for your questions. We'll be happy to address your questions during this 60 minutes period. And now the 53-year Assad regime is over after devastating 13 years of civil war. And the conflict has led to more than 600,000 deaths and over 6 million refugees, and about 60% of the Syrian population displaced during the conflict. Now, with the fall of Assad regime, there is a sense of optimism and hope in the air, and Syrians are seeking stability and a functional and a democratic government. So with our distinguished panel today, we'll explore whether Syria can succeed or fall into another cycle of conflict and humanitarian disaster, and what roles can regional and international powers play in shaping Syria's future. To find the answers to our critical questions, I'm joined by a fascinating panel of speakers with remarkable expertise and backgrounds. First, I'd like to start with Caroline Rose. She's the Director of Strategic Blind Spots Portfolio at the New Lines Institute. What an excellent name, Caroline. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you so much.
For the Institute, yeah. And second, we have Dr. Suleyman Ozeren. He's the Senior Fellow at Orion Policy Institute and Professorial Lecturer at American University in Washington, D.C. And third, we have Sara Harmouch. She's the founder and the CEO of H9 Defense Consultancy Firm and PhD candidate at American University. And lastly, we have Kawa Hassan. He's a non-resident fellow with Stimson's Middle East and North Africa program, and he's joining us from Brussels. Welcome all. And thanks for joining us today. Caroline, I'd like to start first with you. So since the collapse of Assad regime, the leader of HTS, Ahmed al-Shara, has been giving unifying messages and sharing its desire for inclusive and legitimate government. Do you think the HTS leader is sincere in his messages and will be successful in fulfilling the optimism in the air?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'd like to start out just saying it's really been incredible and stunning to watch what events have unfolded in Syria the last two and a half weeks, really. And ultimately, I think that when we look at how HTS will transform Syria, I think that we've seen a number of confidence-building measures and positive signs that Sara is pursuing a much different vision in Syria than what we saw, of course, with the Assad regime, as well as what we saw in Idlib as well. That being said, I think it's in some cases too early to tell whether this new cosmetic campaign and PR campaign that has been clearly undertaken by HTS and by Sara, of course, formerly known as Jalani, it's still too early to tell whether this will be something that sticks. I think that right now, HTS, they've got two ultimate goals, which is sanctions relief, and then, of course, recognition and the delisting from the foreign terrorist organization list from the United States, from its partners such as the EU, the UK. And so ultimately, that has placed them on the best behavior that they could be on. They, of course, have tried to embark on this diplomatic campaign with the United States, with the UK, with Italy, with Germany. And it's quite impressive, the diplomatic outreach and the organization that HTS has been able to garner in the days after Damascus has fallen. But I think that we all need to watch very closely and monitor HTS governance very closely, not only looking at the big picture diplomatic engagements and promises that they're making to, for example, the United Nations, to the United States, and to other key players in Syria, but also how they govern the minutia of their governance, not only in Damascus, but across Syria overall, how they incorporate minority groups, how they treat women, how they incorporate them into the governance process, and really measure how that is changing over time. It's very impressive what they've been able to do in the last 2 weeks. The organization of the ministerial positions, incorporating some of the old regime ministries and putting together this transition government. And I think that's impressive, but I think that we all have to monitor over time for a long time to see if there is behavioral change and if they will resort back to some of their more historic ideological principles, and whether this is really a campaign that will stick or not.
Thank you, Caroline.
I'm going to just add a couple of things.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
I think I completely agree. It's very early on in the stages to see what type of governance Ahmad Shara is going to be conducting, or what type of treatment it's going to be for the people. But, you know, looking at how ideologically he's trying to be different and set himself apart from his former affiliations with Al-Qaeda and with Jabhat Fath al-Sham and the Nusra Front, there is similarities between how he's right now trying to appeal and right now trying to govern, going back to the Islamic Empire's time. To be specific, the Rashidun Caliphate, during which was the most expansive campaigns during the Islamic empires, which was all expansionary. They knew how to integrate conquered people and different minorities, different sects of religion. And it seems to me that Ahmad Shara is following a similar model. Is he truly going to abide by it? Is it going to be just an image or a front? And the distancing from Al-Qaeda, is it just in order to get that international recognition and be removed off of those, you know, sanction lists and the terrorism designation list? It could be, but I think we'll have to see how it unfolds. But I also do think, regardless of the fact that he formally distanced himself from Al-Qaeda, and those ties have been officially in the public eyes been broken, I also do want to caution that, just like Caroline said, it's going to take time for us to see if those ties are actually broken or not. But I do also think that Al-Qaeda learned from its mistakes with the Taliban. Taliban's been trying to get recognition for as long as since the withdrawal from since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And their ties with Al-Qaeda has always been the biggest problem. Even Al-Qaeda at the beginning tried to distance itself from Taliban by saying they would not be conducting attacks from Afghanistan. So is this something that overarching the organization learned, and this is why Ahmad Shara is now following that? Or is he truly distanced himself, and we're going to see how, yes, he integrates women, he integrates different sects and different minorities within his governance model, or not? And I think time will only tell, but we do need to be watching for all of these models. And that model within the Islamic empires was one of the most effective models to expand, to garner more territory, to garner more popular support. They integrated different religions, different people who practice different religions within their frameworks, and they were paying jizya for that. So how he governs and deals and going to be doing, you know, organizing all these different committees, time will only tell. But, you know, with the optimism, we hope it's going to be different. We hope it's going to be better, but we will have to see.
Thanks, Sarah. So, and, you know, as you mentioned, HTS is one factor, and there are also other factors like Turkey. And Suleyman has so much extensive experience, you know, with his research, field research in Syria and Turkey. And Turkey has been one of the most major external actors during this Syrian war, civil war, particularly supporting Syrian rebels, Syrian National Army, and also relations with HTS and fighting against the Kurdish forces in north. Suleyman, how do you evaluate Turkey's influence? And do you think Turkey has strong leverage over the HTS in forming the government? And so what do you think about the things will unfold?
Yeah, I think
in the short term and in the long term.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with Caroline in terms of, like, there is optimism in the air, but there are also so many risks or potential, you know, risks that could, you know, undo this sort of the positive mood or the trends. The fall of Assad regime and HTS takeover of Damascus have fundamentally shifted the entire power structure and actors' influence in the region. I think Turkey, among like maybe with Israel, seem to be improving their positions. Now Turkey has much more favorable position and with so many opportunities, because as you mentioned, Turkey has been involved in the conflict indirectly and directly. Until 2016, Turkey has been one of the major actors supporting and sponsoring and providing assistance to many non-state actors, including some of the elements of Al-Qaeda affiliated, ISIS affiliated organizations. Then Turkey has created its own proxy, which is now sort of an umbrella organization of Syrian National Army. Generally speaking, and this is sort of an officially stated concerns, that Turkey has two major concerns regarding the Syrian conflict, and especially now the outcome of what would happen in the near future in terms of what Ahmed al-Shara would do and HTS would manage to establish a governing an operational government. And these two concerns obviously are securing its southern border and preventing any de facto autonomous Kurdish region. And the second one is to prevent any exodus of refugees, and in connection with that, to also facilitate safe return of the refugees who have been in Turkey since the very beginning of the conflict. During the first years of the conflict, when I conducted field research and in the subsequent 3-4 years, one of the observations that I had was that Turkey has been trying to work with the actors, trying to identify the actors that Ankara would like to align with, that took a long time. But this also, I think that process also enabled Turkey to establish connections, and HTS is not an exception to that. Turkey has connections with the HTS, but I think Turkey's bid was on the Syrian National Army. Turkey has its own interim government, the Syrian interim government, and I think that there's also a big question about what is going to happen to that interim government. Are they going to be able to merge with the government established in Damascus? That is also a big question. I think we will discuss maybe in the upcoming sessions in this panel about the Kurdish question, but I think these are the two main issues that Turkey is very concerned about. But generally speaking, Turkey has so many opportunities. In fact, I should say Turkey has the golden opportunity if Ankara plays its hand well. Turkey can further its influence in Damascus, politically, socially, economically. This could empower Turkey to use it as a leverage against for a much better, more stable Syria. Turkey can also use that as again a vantage point to improve its relationship with the regional countries, as well as the United States and the West. Why am I talking about this? Because all of these positives can also can also act as a positive impetus for creating much more stable Syria, because Turkey has vested interest more than many of the external actors in having a stable Syria. So I think that could also be a positive thing, but of course with so many risks. For example, if Turkey overplays its hand in pursuing of a much more influence, then this could be a very risky undertaking. In fact, this could isolate Turkey. If Turkey seeks more influence through like maintaining its proxies, i.e. the Syrian National Army, if Turkey drags its feet to slow down the disarming the SNA and other proxies, or if Turkey chooses to expand its military incursions into even southeast Syria. These could act as a spoilers of the of this entire process. I think Turkey can stand out as a major spoiler as opposed to as a major actor in contributing to much more stable Syria. So there are two options. One is the best option, and the other is the worst option. There is no middle ground, in my opinion, because the middle ground would extend with prolong that could prolong the process of reconciliation. And again, I would go back to Caroline's and Sarah's comments that yes, there are so many opportunities, a very positive climate in the air, but what is going to happen next? I think it is in the hands of, first of all, the HTS and Ahmed al-Shara and his own inner circle, but also the external actors and also other very important internal actors in Syria.
Yeah, thanks, Suleyman, kind of highlighting the Turkey's role. And I want to actually now talk about Iran and want to turn to Kawa about, what's happening with Iran, because Iran has been losing its power, its proxies. It was a really difficult year for Iran, 2024, and they lost one of the most strategic allies in Syria, and then the axis of resistance now has significantly weakened. So what strategies can Iran follow to recover from this significant loss?
Thank you, Suat, and happy to join Caroline, Sara, and Suleyman. Thanks for the invite. So actually, not only Iran, but Iran and Russia are biggest losers of this, of this tectonic shift, the fall of Assad. It's a political tsunami, no exaggeration to say that. And the unimaginable happened. I mean, 4 weeks ago, this was unimaginable. Probably even Ahmed al-Shara, Aika, Jolani himself, he didn't expect that these things could go as fast as they went. So in addition, the fall of Assad, but also the weakening of Hezbollah, particularly weakening of Hezbollah, significant weakening of Hezbollah, means that actually the forward defense doctrine and strategy of Iran is actually in tatters, literally. It's in disarray. And so Iran right now has its Iraqi allies / proxies, depending on how you look at them, and the Houthis at its disposal, right? In terms of trying to kind of maintain its regional influence. So one of the views you get from the discussions in Tehran is that they believe that the transition will be very, very bloody, and that there is a chance, from their view, that there is a good chance that Syria will descend into chaos and civil war, and probably even it's a hope, not even a perspective, that this will happen, and that down the line this may open new opportunities for Iran, through Iraq, to again, try to reestablish its role in Syria. But for now, Iran is the biggest loser, and I think they are trying, the Iranians, recalibrate their strategy, right? As how to deal with this new Syria. And it was interesting that the Minister of Foreign Affairs said, election is the best way forward for Syria. I mean, that's fascinating to hear that from the Iranian foreign minister, now saying, the best way forward is election in Syria. But taking that also to Iraq, if you allow me, Suat, and also the role of Iran in Iraq, because I think that's key right now. So for Iran right now, its influence in Iraq is key to maintain some, sort of influence in the region. And what is interesting is actually the pro-Iran groups in Iraq, the 3 or 4 militias, Kataib, Hezbollah, Nujaba, and other Sayyid al-Shuhada, Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada, they are silent as graves, about what happened in Syria, even no official statements. And it tells a lot, it tells a lot that actually they are still in a state of shock, I would say, literally in a state of shock. They can't comprehend what happened, and recalibrating their strategy. But even more than that, the talk in Baghdad is that among the most powerful Shia parties and also the Iran-backed groups, it's actually Iraq, and by Iraq they mean these pro-Iran groups, and maybe some other leaders. They are next on the hit list of Netanyahu, and that going forward, that they think that Israel will not stop here, and that they may hit Iran, but also they may hit the Iraqis, the pro-Iraq groups. So there's a lot of nervousness, I would say, right now in Iran and within the pro-Iran groups in Baghdad.
Okay, thanks, Kawa. So kind of expanding from your concern with the happening Iraq, ISIS is something has kind of devastated both countries, and it's another concern. So I would like to turn to Caroline and Sara and asking whether ISIS can exploit this power vacuum and resurge in the region.
Yeah, I was muted, sorry. I think that's a great question. I think the reason ISIS was such a big force within Iraq and Syria is because of the Assad's oppressive regime. ISIS, capitalized on the grievances of the Syrians, was able to recruit. Right now, the situation in Syria could be another prime opportunity for ISIS to make a resurgence and make a comeback. And that will depend on, as Suleyman was talking about, the Turkish and the Kurdish question. Because right now we know that there are areas within Syria that ISIS could still operate as a shadow government, but there are also the prisons where a lot of the ISIS fighters are being held that are being protected by Kurdish forces. And if the Turkish role becomes more prominent and the fight turns to the Kurds, the Kurdish guards that are keeping those prisons, that are holding these fighters, might have to be taken to a different fight, which could give ISIS the prime opportunity to strike and to release all these fighters. And then we have also Al-Hawl camp in Syria that also has a lot of these ISIS fighters. So it all really depends on, again, it goes to Ahmad Shara''s governance style and model, and if he's able to maintain a centralized authority and power and be able to unite the people where ISIS could not have any opportunities to recruit under a united front where he governs differently than how Assad governed. And that might not be a great thing for ISIS, and ISIS might have to work harder in that way to recruit and work from different regions and across different countries if they're unable to use Syria as that fertile ground for its operations.
Thanks, Sara. Caroline, would you like to add?
Of course, yeah. I think that ultimately, right now, at least in this past week, as we've seen the breakdown of this 4-day ceasefire in the Northeast, as SNA forces have pushed further, and also we're seeing SDF forces either lose territory or experience tension in very strategic sites like Raqqa. Also some issues as well with local community members and residents. I think right now the Northeast is going to prove to be a very important flashpoint in a potential ISIS resurgence. And this also has to do, of course, with the fate and the capacity that these forces have, their role in ISIS detention center facility security. The fact that over the last few years, there have been grievances expressed by quarterly Operation Inherent Resolve reports to Congress that identified poor detention facility security, professionalism amongst the guards, and an increasing likelihood of a breakout attempt with ISIS fighters. And I think that moving forward, looking at, the Trump administration, they are looking to conduct a full-scale withdrawal of its 900 forces, its active duty personnel that are operating in Syria. There are a few more contractors, but it's roughly about 900 forces, American forces on the ground in Syria. And if we see their absence, I think it's worth considering how this will affect the Northeast, and additionally, how this could also create an opportunity for ISIS to try and either launch more sophisticated attacks, try and reignite jailbreak attempts, try and conduct mass recruitment amongst detainees and displaced peoples, particularly in camps like Al-Hol. And so I think that ultimately that's another item that we all need to be aware of, is how Trump is going to seek to withdraw its forces from Northeast Syria. And if it's not immediately Northeast Syria, it is likely also going to be in Iraq. And the U.S. Contingent, its Operation Inherent Resolve mission in Northeast Syria, heavily relies upon the logistical, strategic, tactical support that its forces in Iraq serve. Particularly bases that are, in both Baghdad as well as Erbil. And as the United States is now contractually obligated to start winding down its presence by the end of 2026, I think that we're going to see several shifts in how the United States behaves, how it conducts itself, how it conducts CT operations in the Northeast. And so I think that, as Sara mentioned, there needs to be a plan of how to contain the ISIS threat in the Badia, how to contain it in the Northeast, how to consolidate greater control, how to ensure that integration of forces and command control is smooth. Because ISIS, as we've seen time and time again, they exploit these sorts of opportunities. They try and find where there are moments of disunity and fragmentation, and they exploit it. And so I think that really there are many, many breakout opportunities that ISIS will try and take advantage of in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Kurds are the kind of major allies in U.S. fight against ISIS in the region. So when we talk about Kurds, I think we should also talk about Turkey as well. And I want to turn to Suleyman. So what are the Turkey's goal in Syria, especially with the Kurdish region?
I think as I summarized in the first part, the Turkey's major concern, especially like officially stated, our objective is to prevent any autonomous Kurdish region. But I think, as Caroline mentioned, there's also a very delicate situation there, which is another comeback of ISIS. And if there would be a large-scale conflict between SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is composed of mainly the YPG, the People's Protection Unit, I think this could destabilize that northeastern part of Syria. The larger question is, I think, as we have seen this many times, whenever there have been instabilities, there have been conflicts within Iraq or Syria, that gave an opportunity to ISIS to continue their recruitment, continue their activities, and expand their territories. But this is a very complex problem. I think Turkey has been working with the United States to address its own security concerns, because in a way, the Kurdish problem that Turkey has had for decades now it becomes much more complex. The Kurdish issue in Syria and the Kurdish issue in Turkey have become so intertwined that it is almost now very difficult to separate. That makes Turkey's position much more, I should say, aggressive to take certain measures. The other complexity is how Turkey is going to do that. Turkey has been using and leveraging the SNA, the Syrian National Army, its proxy, to go to fight against some of the elements of YPG and SDF. But again, there are I think three big questions. One, what would Trump administration do? I mean, as Caroline mentioned, Trump has stated this many times that there is no reason for the U.S. military to be in Syria. And the second big question is how Ahmed al-Shara and the regime in Syria, whatever that regime is going to be in Damascus, do regarding a national army? Are they going to be able to create a unified national army, disarming all of the proxies and maybe enlisting some of them into this national army, which can be capable of, responding to handling the ISIS resurgence? The third big question is Turkey, will Turkey be, will Turkey work with the United States and other Western allies, and of course Damascus, to find a solution? Or will Turkey choose to go, choose a unilateral action? I think these three questions are very important. And as of today, there are two confusing messages coming from Turkey. One is, as recent as yesterday, Erdogan said Turkey is bigger than Turkey, and then the Minister of Foreign Affairs said, Damascus can handle ISIS and YPG problem or PYD problem. If that would be the case, then there's no need for Turkey to intervene. But I think this is a tactical approach on the side of Turkey. So there's not an easy answer to this, but I think the much preferable option to me is if Turkey would choose to work with Damascus, work with the United States to put more pressure on the SDF, and if they can somehow pull back a little bit further to the northeast, that could ease some tensions, because Turkey wants to create a buffer zone free of any presence of the SDF forces in that buffer zone throughout the 911 kilometers long Turkey and Syria border.
Yeah, so Turkey is trying to fill the vacuum. And another neighboring country is the Iraq, one of the most significant country. And, with the large number of Kurdish population and Shia population, and also we see Iran's influence. So Kawa, how do you think the status quo will impact Iraq and its relations with Syria?
Right. So before answering that, Suat, I just, adding to what Suleyman said about, the situation in Northeast. And so in the last 2-3 days, we have seen for the first time statements from Germany and France about the need from the foreign ministers, actually, about the need to, about the importance of having Kurds as allies and partners in the fight against ISIS. Not only that, but also French foreign minister said it's important, it's key to also have Kurds, represented in the political process. And also the German foreign minister said, actually, she went even further, saying that Kobani Ain al-Arab is the symbol of the fight against ISIS. So we have to wait and see how these European positions will develop in the coming weeks, and also what will be ultimately the Trump policy in Syria and its impact on Northeast. Obviously, we don't know that, so time will tell. On Iraq, the impact on Iraq. So initially, before the fall of Assad, the Iraqi government actually came out somehow in defense of the regime. Under the pressure from the pro-Iran groups and also some Shia, influential Shia parties, and even the pro-Iran, some militias, they crossed to Syria, and those who already had troops there, they took part in some fights. But when they saw that at the end of the day, they saw that particularly after the fall of Aleppo, they saw that, and Iranians also realized that Syrian army has collapsed. There is no way that the regime can remain in power. So that's when they realize things are changing. And after the fall of Damascus, or even before the fall of Damascus, Ahmed al-Shara, he sent even a public message to Iraqi prime minister saying, we have no intention whatsoever to expand to Iraq. Our aim is Damascus, is to take down the regime of Assad. And and then after the fall of regime, what we have seen is that the Iraqi government has been trying to coordinate diplomatic, work with its Arab neighbors, with the Europeans, with Americans. They participated at the meeting of the Arab Contact Group, where also, Blinken and European, diplomats attended. But so far, there isn't really a new Iraq strategy as how to deal with the new Syria. So far, there is no new strategy. What they hope for is that the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham will continue protecting the important holy Shiite shrines in Damascus. That's very important for the Shiites. And, the Iraqi government reopened the Iraqi embassy, but still they are in a state of, somehow really shock and trying to recalibrate their position, trying to develop a strategy, and also they suffer also from a lack of any kind of contacts with the new rulers in Damascus. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and what we have seen, for instance, Europeans have sent diplomats to Damascus, meeting with Ahmad al-Shara, and we see a lot of diplomatic activities to meet with the new rulers without, recognizing them. But we haven't seen yet such an attempt from Baghdad. And, to first to try to understand, the policy of the new rulers and also engage them. So far, there isn't that attempt, that effort. What you see, as I said, in my previous intervention, is that there is really this sense that maybe pro-Iran groups will be the next target for Israel, and if that happens, we have to. I don't know how Iran and these militias will react to that. One last thing on ISIS. I think it was Caroline who said, that's right, that there's an agreement that the U.S. troops will withdraw, gradually, dephase, from Iraq by, I think, September 2026. It will be interesting to see, given the new developments in Damascus, the fact that Assad has gone, and there are serious risks of spillover. So first, resurgence of ISIS. Second, we don't know how the transition will evolve in Syria, and the real risk of, of infightings between different groups. How Iraqi government and also the main Shia parties who are part of the coalition government, the coordination Shia framework, how will they, kind of recalibrate this policy of having the Americans out of Iraq? So I think it will be an important, very interesting to keep an eye on that development in Baghdad. And so, yeah, I leave it at that regarding, the impact on Iraq. How Iraq may influence the transition in Syria. So far, zero impact on the transition in Syria. Only one Iraqi politician, Haider al-Abadi, the former prime minister, actually came out and said, we need to be more proactive. We need to come up with a humanitarian package to support the Syrians and provide humanitarian assistance. But for the rest is really wait and see. That is the mood. That is kind of the approach in Baghdad. Wait and see, apprehension and fear of resurgence of ISIS and a spillover into Iraq.
So Kawa, to kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, to just to add a very a short intervention to what Kawa also was talking about. When we talk about the Kurdish groups in Syria, we mostly talk about the SDF, the PYD, and YPG. But of course, there are other Kurdish groups like in the Kurdish National Council of Syria. I think one of the strategies would be empowering all of these groups and uniting them and making sure that they would also be part of this reconciliation effort, as opposed to creating another sort of a actor in any part of Syria. In this case, in this northeastern Syria, I think this would, in a way, strengthen the idea of unity, a unified front, and also somehow prevent any military intervention from other actors, in this case, again, Turkey.
Okay, so yeah, great point. So now I want to turn to Lebanon. So, it's another country that I think so much surprised with the collapse of Assad regime, which was a key sponsor of Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah so much weakened with its war with Israel, and now Assad is gone. I want to ask Sara, so how Lebanese government and the people perceive these changes?
No, that's a great question. And Lebanon is always impacted by what happens in Syria, since we do border that country. And we've seen spillovers from the Syrian civil war, from the refugee crisis, from all of these things. And to talk right now, the Lebanese government is trying to push for an election to elect a new president. Within these, they're trying to take opportunities of a weakened Hezbollah to be able to name a new president that is not going to be repeating the same mistakes, that is not going to be influenced as much by Hezbollah's people or Syria or Iran. And the debates continue on that name, but with the front runner right now being General Joseph Aoun, who's former military and who has been the leading candidate in those conversations. But also within the new Syria, as we've seen, holds many uncertainties for a lot of different minorities within Syria. And Lebanon's is comprised of 17 different sects. And especially within these minorities, we've seen already since this past Sunday, Lebanese security officials have stated that there's been more than 100,000 people who crossed the Lebanese-Syrian border to go into Lebanon, fearing persecution because they're a minority faith, because they're Shia, because they're Alawi, and these were the populations protected under al-Assad. So now, and these people are also crossing illegally into the country. That will impact the Lebanese demographics immensely, because we've seen the civil conflict between the different sects. We've seen how people will either side with al-Assad or side against al-Assad, or side with Hezbollah or side against Hezbollah. And because of the different sectarianism within Lebanon, with the Shias and the Sunnis and the Alawi and the Druze, there's been multiple times where each of these sects have clashed with each other. Especially, we've seen some united within the Israel-Lebanese conflict, and some also still celebrated Hassan Nasrallah's death, or even mourned Hassan Nasrallah's death, and how those refugees going from Syria to Lebanon is going to impact the political landscape in Lebanon. It's going to be something that we do need to watch for sure. And while Ahmad Shara, Hayat Tahrir Sham's leader, stated that he's going to be protecting these minorities, and they're going to be free on practicing their own religion, there are some people, some of these refugees crossing into Lebanon are still getting threats online via social media. They have not stated who is it coming from. And, while Ahmad Shara has said we will not be threatening them, it might be coming from different armed factions within Syria, which they still exist there. And it's going to depend on how Shara is going to lead and going to dismantle these factions, and going to be calling for refugees to go back into Syria. But as of right now, it's a very uncertain situation, and people who are from different faith are still scared of persecution, and they are fleeing to Lebanon, to other bordering country, and that will raise questions on the peace aspect and the geopolitical landscape of how Lebanon is going to be, and if it's going to get a president first or it's not, and how all of these factors are going to play out within the next couple of weeks and months.
Excellent. So thanks, Sara. So I want to shift the conversation from the neighboring countries to a much more regional and international problem, which is a Captagon. Caroline, you have been studying this topic for many years, and you pretty much documented how the Syrian regime was involved in this billion-dollar illicit economy. So what's going to happen to this economy? Do you think it's going to remain in Syria, or it's going to relocate to other regions?
Certainly. And I'll just preface this and say that, over the last 5, almost 6 years that we've been doing work and conducting research on the regime's relationship with Captagon, I received this question a lot of, what does it feel like to see now these Captagon laboratories that have been seized in Douma and in the outskirts of Damascus and Latakia? And I always say that it's shocking, but it's not surprising. I mean, we had extensive evidence linking Maher al-Assad, Assad family cousins, key elements of the 4th Armored Division, the Air Force Intelligence Directorate. And still, it really is still shocking to see inside of these facilities that clearly express industrial scale capacity with drugs like Captagon. And so now, of course, the question is, what happens next? Will we still see Syria as the hub of Captagon production? I think that we will still see Captagon production, at least on the lower scale inside of Syria. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a very difficult economic transition inside of Syria. There's so much to be done in terms of trying to revamp the economy, increase licit exports, and really encourage many Syrians to participate in the formal licit economy. Old habits will die hard, and there will be many individuals that may not have been immediately associated with the regime, but perhaps worked in a factory, or they were, one of the smugglers along the Syrian-Jordanian border that, with families and communities that have participated in, illicit cigarette smuggling or illicit fuel smuggling, some sort of illicit trade. And it's going to be very difficult to provide enough incentives for Syrians to really participate in the formal licit economy. So that being said, I think that we'll see small scale production of Captagon, maybe a few hundred pills here and there in the basements of villas or, in warehouses and whatnot. We'll also likely see the spillover of Captagon beyond Syria into sites like Iraq, where we've already seen the production of Captagon in the last year or 2 years. We've also seen some production in Kuwait, in a very small scale in Turkey, in Egypt, in Libya, and in some cases, interestingly, in Europe, as far as the Netherlands and in Germany. But ultimately, I think that we're going to see the end of industrial scale Captagon production inside of Syria. Ahmed al-Shara, in his victory speech at the Umayyad Mosque, about, I want to say, a week and a half ago, did specifically name Captagon as one of the different kind of images of Syria and vestiges of the regime that he wanted to cleanse and to essentially eradicate. And I think that this new the Salvation government's caretaker government in Syria, they will seek to really shine a light on how the regime was associated with illicit drug production and shut down some of these major factories. But ultimately, the question is going to be, can they revive the economy to a point that people and Syrians are incentivized to shift away from illicit trades overall, not just Captagon? And I'm not necessarily sure of that. And I think also sanctions relief factor in there and normalization with HTS. So there's kind of this question of, what comes first? It's kind of the chicken or the egg question. Does normalization, does sanctions relief come first? Does, pumping in liquidity into the Syrian economy? And that will all, I think, really change the course of how Syria is able to recover and incentivize people to participate in licit sectoral sectors.
Yeah, excellent point. You mentioned about sanctions. Now, Ahmed al-Shara is seeking for the lifting of sanctions and the removal of FTO designation from the United States. So, what kind of approach you expect from the U.S. government? So this is a question for all our panelists. So anybody can jump in. So what do you expect from the U.S. government in the short term?
I mean, there's been conversations, as I wrote in a piece last week, that the U.S. has been in conversations to remove the $10 billion on Ahmed Shara's head as an FTO. And then the UK has been discussing to delist him. And then after those rumors, and conversations made it out, I've seen that the UK is not considering that. And other governments, but again, we're also seeing other governments engage with Ahmed Shara, and he is still designated as a on the terrorism list, and he's still been sanctioned. So that also brings in different dynamics of how are they engaging with with a person listed on as an on an FTO and on a terrorist designation list, but they're also being optimistic that there is a change. But those dynamics and the legalities of engaging with him and with the new face of Syria is definitely interesting to see, and whether or not those engagements might even push those countries to delist or to do something that could be possible, that could be intentional even. And it's going to take time to see how the countries are gonna go about it. But there definitely been some caution, there's been some optimism, and there's a balance between both, and countries are trying to navigate that balance. So it's going to take time to see what they decide to do. But these are big decisions, I think, because anything that does happen, if he's delisted or HTS is removed from the FTO list, and then Ahmad Shara does something or HTS does something to revert back to its old ideological habits, like Caroline said, all habits do die hard, or more evidence comes out that the group is still affiliated with Al-Qaeda, that could make a lot of countries look very bad on the world stage. And I think image and perception is going to play out a lot within those aspects, and it's going to be a while before we see any type of actions, because they're going to have to look into it very deeply before they do make any step towards those delistings.
Just to add as well, I think that ultimately, I think we're going to see a bit of rule breaking in the coming months with the USG and even its partners as well. Federal law prohibits organizations providing material support, anything that could be seen as assistance to a foreign terrorist organization designated by the United States and its partners. And I think that this makes it very tricky for example, aid organizations to try and provide material, assistance to organizations on the ground, to, try and pump money and assistance for the Syrian economy to different communities. And I think that we'll likely see, as the United States wants to continue to dangle the idea of sanctions relief and delisting HTS in front of Sara, in front of this new caretaker government, I think that we'll still see some small level engagement, and in some cases even collaboration. And I think that there are a few shared areas of collaboration that the United States will use as kind of this experimental test. Number one is finding American citizens that the United States government was either aware of or not aware of. For example, you have Austin Tice, and then you also have another citizen known by Travis. He was actually went to Syria and was found actually to be detained in Syrian regime-held prisons that the United States government was not necessarily aware of. There might be a few more cases like that, and I think that we might see some exchanges, some brief engagements between USG officials through back channels, through organizations that are working on the ground in order to collaborate there. Additionally, there are some other areas that the United States USG can also provide technical assistance that also, relates to what we're seeing with these mass graves that are being identified. For example, the United States offering technical expertise for the identification, for, the efforts to try and identify these bodies and identify grave sites. And then finally, moving to counter-narcotics collaboration, the dismantlement of these labs. Because as of right now, we just have community members and HTS forces that are guarding these sites. They're likely going to want to dismantle them. And it is a very bad idea to just get a community together, get some folks together and try and take down industrial scale professional laboratory equipment and the precursors that are also very dangerous to handle. So there's going to have to be some sort of technical advisory capacity and an operation there. And that's something that the USG could do. It's something that the UN could do. Some sort of international actor can sweep in and really provide this as a test case for normalization and engagement. But I think the United States is going to take its time. I think that it's a conversation It should be a conversation, and it's an active conversation, but I don't see the United States doing it before Trump comes into office. And I certainly do not think that a Trump administration will immediately seek to normalize and recognize HTS.
I
Thank
think
you,
the
Caroline. So, go ahead.
yeah, I think the normalization is going to be like everything's going to be normal without calling them normal. I think this trend is like now countries are opening their embassies and activating their embassies. This is one trend. Another one is Blinken has already stated that they are in communication with Ahmed al-Shara. I think as things move toward positive trends, we may see a fast track normalization in terms of recognition, in terms of even delisting him and HTS. But I think there is also another question. These like the United States and other external actors are kind of in the process of wait and see, and also watching each other. I think that could also somehow delay the process, but I'm expecting sort of a fast track, improvements on that arena. In terms of the United States, I think again the big question is how the U.S. would handle, Turkey, and also the Kurdish question in Syria. That could also affect the U.S. decisions regarding, HTS and what's going to happen, and the decisions regarding whether the direct engagement with the HTS or somehow continuing this sort of a interesting, as Caroline put it, rule breaking, trend.
Okay. Thanks, Suleyman. So we have 3 great questions. These are topics that we haven't touched upon yet, but we have only 2 minutes left. Sorry for this kind of mismanagement of our time, but I really want to touch upon the Israel case. And this is from Professor Harmouch. What mechanisms might Israel use to assert its influence, and how can the international community address the risks of renewed proxy conflicts and further destabilization? Anybody with strong opinions about these questions, please jump in.
I could just I'll briefly just put out
Sure.
my initial thoughts. I mean, I think what we're seeing here boil over a series of different flashpoints. We've got what's happening in the Northeast, and then we also now have encroachment beyond the Golan Heights from Israel. And ultimately, there's this question. I think we've had the same question with Israel expanding the front into Lebanon, and it's what is Israel's end goal here? And I think that ultimately this proves that Israel has put a very ambiguous goal of countering Iran and Iran-aligned militias and Iran-aligned presence throughout the Middle East. Syria, I think, challenges that objective a bit because while, of course, there still is the presence of Iran-aligned militant forces, they still have assets in Syria, and there's this broad question of will Iran be able to retain its presence? It does have an unfriendly government with the caretaker government that HTS is controlling, and ultimately, I think that when it comes to what Israel wants to achieve, am I breaking up a little bit?
We can't hear you.
Yeah, no problem. I might the mic to someone else, maybe Kawa, for a bit while I figure out my internet connection.
Yeah,
you're frozen, but we can't hear you.
Right. Yeah. So before just addressing this issue, I think the adding to what Suleyman said about the Kurdish issue in Syria, I think in my view, what is important for international actors right now to pursue in the interest of peace and stability in Syria is really encouraging an intra-Kurdish dialogue between PYD and Kurdish National Council (KNC), and I think that's key. That's in the interest of Syria. That is also in the interest of Turkey, but also Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan, so that there is at least, I wouldn't say a united Kurdish position because that is not possible due to a lot of historic differences between both groups, but at least to develop a joint Kurdish vision about the Northeast Syria, about the Kurdish areas, and how Kurdish rights, legitimate rights, should be protected and preserved in future Syria. I think that's in the interest of everyone. And so that's key. On Israel, I think I agree with Caroline. I mean, Israel right now has a golden opportunity to strike at will, anytime, in Syria, and destroy whatever has been left from the Syrian army. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, according to Syrian Human Rights Observatory, probably over 80% of Syrian missile navy, most advanced equipment had been destroyed. So then the question here is, what is the end game in Syria? If the end game is to expand and occupy more and more territories, is that the case? I think we have seen clear condemnations from Arab countries, from Turkey, from even from Germany, saying that that is illegal. So if that is the end game, we have to wait and see. I don't know to what extent how that could really, in the end, help, or Israeli end goal of having a normalized relations in the region. So I mean, here the question is, what is the end game, and that linked to what is the end game also in Gaza. I think these are really interlinked.
So, Kawa, thanks for these remarks. And there's other questions. Hopefully, we are going to cover those questions in the future in different events. I'd like to thank you for our panelists for their engaging and insightful comments. It was really an amazing and informative 60 minutes. And also, I'd like to thank for our audience for joining us today. Please follow us, Orion Policy, on LinkedIn and X. And thanks again, and happy holidays.
Thank you very much, Suat. Thanks. Happy holidays to you all. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Holidays.
Happy holidays.